You're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher in SENDCO myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I'm really excited to be joined by Dr Emma Kell. Emma has nearly 25 years as a teacher and school leader and currently teaches in alternative provision, as well as working as a writer, speaker and coach. Founder and director of Those That Can Limited, Emma's energies are channeled into keeping great teachers happily in the profession. And as it's the start of the school year, this episode is going to be all about teacher or SENDCO wellbeing. And I'm confident Emma is going to give us some fantastic advice on this topic. Hi, how are you, Emma?
Hello, I'm really well, delighted to be here.
Good. So I've touched a little bit on your background, but not loads. I'd love to hear more about your career and your books. But if we start first with your teaching career, can you tell us more about that and what's been your favourite role maybe?
Yes, asking me my favourite role is a bit like asking me which one my favourite child is.
Oh dear.
It's a good question. No, so my career basically spans from 1998, so I think it is 25 years now,
Wow.
through to present day. Most of it spent in the London Comprehensives, firstly teaching modern languages and then moving into English. So loved teaching in central London through the early 2000s. Which you don't realise how lucky you are, do you? It was the time of education. There was funding everywhere. It wasn't perfect, but I remember taking really vulnerable kids from all sorts of backgrounds with all sorts of challenges. Remember taking them to Berlin, to Barcelona, to Paris, and there were always sort of pots of money you could dip into. So that's probably a contender for my favourite period, is watching a child who'd barely left Camden all his life on a banana boat in the south of France.
Brilliant.
Or watching them successfully order ice cream in French and then victoriously eat their ice creams in a park in Paris. So those moments were amazing. I should say, really, I've been extraordinarily lucky, that's hard to say, in my career. I have had, for the most part, I've worked in schools where I've totally worked hard, played hard, my values have been matched. Obviously it's never been 100% plain sailing, but working alongside brilliant people, always learning, being inspired. So most of my career has been fabulous. I'd say the second contender is really what I'm doing now. So I'm working in an education support centre in Watford called Chesbrook. And I'll say a bit more about alternative provision in a moment, but Chesbrook is for children who have been unable to function in mainstream school. Usually in a series of mainstream schools, it hasn't worked out. And when they end up with us, it's usually because they actually have some kind, they all arguably have a special need of some kind, whether it's diagnosed or not, and their needs haven't been met, and they have found ways of expressing their frustrations at the fact that their needs aren't being met, which have ultimately, in many cases, led to permanent exclusion from school.
Gosh. Yeah, because this is an area that I haven't touched on very much on the podcast, and I've been desperate to get a guest. And, like, my colleagues will know, I've been like, let's talk about alternative provision. I think it's something we need to talk about more, and something not everyone knows what it is. I think, the term AP and people hear it, but I don't think everyone knows what alternative, even people in the teaching profession don't all know what alternative provision is. Can you explain for those that don't know what it actually is?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this. I think that's partly because it means slightly different things in slightly different regions. So my understanding, I've worked in 2 alternative provision settings and with a number of teachers and leaders from alternative provision. And my understanding that it is essentially all of the children who are unable to be in mainstream school. Mm-hmm. So the cliche is that it's lots of boisterous young men who have push teachers downstairs and things like that. And those there are cases of poor decisions being made by boisterous young men with special needs. But actually it also includes children who are too anxious to go to school. Yeah. So in my last alternative provision setting, there were a number of students, mainly girls actually, who had not been able to go to school for as long as 2 years. And actually, prying these young people out of the footwell of the car just to get them into the building for 30 seconds was a massive, massive achievement for them. And we'd build up from 30 seconds to 3 minutes to half an hour just to be in the building.
Yeah.
So young people who, for whatever reason, their mental health has meant have been unable to go to school, and also children in hospital. So
Yeah.
hospitals often come under alternative provision as well, which I hadn't realised until recently either. So it's basically any young person who is unable to be in mainstream school. They used to be known as PRUs, pupil referral units. That's no longer used as a term, but the good old-fashioned PRU, the cliche of the good old-fashioned PRU was a bit like a young offenders institution.
Yeah.
So when I first started working in alternative provision, I had friends who said, "Oh, watch out, don't wear any jewellery. Oh, don't wear any jewellery. They might try and pull it off." And I had a male colleague who went to visit for the day from mainstream, and one of his colleagues said, "Take your tie off. Someone might try and strangle you." When in fact, of course, if you've been into an alternative provision setting, they are the calmest, most well-organised, just most serene places to be, because they have to be. You have to really think about everything about the environment. No one shouts. People eat together. There are lovely routines around meals and break times. That is my understanding of what alternative provision.
Oh, thank you. No, I think people appreciate that. I think often there's acronyms or there's terms that you hear when you're teaching, and because there's a presumed knowledge that you know about it, you can't then get to the stage where you can ask somebody what actually it is. And I think that's the danger, isn't it? Some people might be thinking, "Oh, I don't know that much about alternative provision, but who can I ask about it without sounding like I should know?" But yeah, useful to actually ask. So you're passionate about teacher wellbeing, so much so you've written 2 books about this topic. And your first book, I believe, was How to Survive in Teaching Without Imploding, Exploding or Walking Away. I love the title. It's brilliant. What made you want to write this, and who's it for then, Emma?
Oh gosh, so this is a big one. So I said that for the most part of my career, I've been really happy, really blessed. I did have a really difficult period in my career when I found myself in a school. I'm choosing my words carefully, you can tell, where my values were not aligned necessarily. My ways of working, my effective ways of working weren't aligned to the way the school worked, and I had a really difficult year. Prior to that, and during that period as well, in fact, I've been doing some doctoral research on what it is to balance teaching and parenthood. So my own children were very young, and I really wanted to dig into those feelings of guilt and that feeling of never being good enough, and that feeling of just just almost failing at everything all of the time that we often feel as teacher parents. And I am a stubborn optimist, and I wanted to sort of demonstrate through my research that it is possible to be an effective teacher and be an effective parent. And through this research, I found some amazing inspirational examples of schools with flexible working, and parents who are able to I don't know, you think about what role model you want to be, so they come home and they talk about their school day, and their children therefore end up understanding more about the world. And I also came across some really hideous examples of people's careers ending. There was one line from a new mother who said to me, "I just got sick of feeling as if I was letting everybody down all of the time." And just horrific stories of people not being able to go to medical appointments, hospital appointments for their own children because the leave of absence policy didn't allow it, and then those feelings of guilt being exacerbated. So I wanted to do 2 things with How to Survive in Teaching. I wanted to shine a light. So I'm naturally positive, but I did want to shine a light into some of the darker areas of our profession. I was aware of what are known as sort of sausage machine schools. There's a book by Sam Sims and Becky Allen called The Teacher Gap, which is brilliant. And I mean, there's been a teacher retention crisis for as long as I've been in teaching. But they analysed some of the factors, and they talked about these sausage machine schools. And they're these schools which basically chomp through early career teachers. And, these early career teachers come into the profession, they think, okay, this is how the profession is, I'm not staying for long. They stick around for a year, 2 years, maybe 3, and then they leave teaching, and that's it. And I found myself getting really angry with these people, these parents who were made to feel that it wasn't possible to be a parent and be a teacher, about these young people, or not young people, new teachers who had put everything on hold to become a teacher, and then left thinking that teaching is something that something where they need to feel inadequate all the time and need to feel stressed all the time, otherwise they're not doing it properly. So I wanted to shine a light into some of the darker areas of the profession, and then I wanted to talk to some head teachers and go into some schools where they really are working hard on keeping teachers and getting it right. And that's how I got into the whole area of staff wellbeing. And staff wellbeing not being the fluffy bolt-on stuff you said in our preparation. I just wanted a kettle which worked. Yeah,
Absolutely. I would have been more than happy with a kettle that worked and some biscuits in the staff room. That would have done me for wellbeing.
and some exactly. And if you think about poor wellbeing, well, a malfunctioning photocopier at 8:22 a.m.
Oh, the stuff of nightmares. I actually think I had nightmares about the photocopier sometimes, which is ridiculous, isn't it? Because that stress of knowing, even if you get there early, you could be waiting so long that you're not going to get the resources done in time. It is a genuine stress, and you wouldn't be prepared for your lessons. Then if you've got a full day of teaching, you're scuppered.
Horrendous. And I had to have a word with myself. About 12 years into teaching, I basically told myself I wasn't going to let technology and photocopiers make me cry anymore, because I spent so long sobbing over a photocopier at 8 a.m. So anyway, that's how I realized that staff wellbeing isn't about the bolt-on fluffy stuff. It's about how people communicate. It's about, if someone teaches in your classroom, what state do they leave your classroom in afterwards?
Yes.
It's about when you say good morning, do you get a cheerful good morning back again, or do people blank you in the corridor? Do people go to the staff room? Do they have a moment to sit and have a giggle and decompress a bit about the school day, or do people hide in their classrooms in the gaps between lessons, either because they just feel they've got so much work to do they can't leave their classroom, or because actually they haven't formed those links and those bonds and they don't have that sense of belonging with other colleagues? So in the end, I'm onto wellbeing now, but I discovered through all of my research really is that wellbeing is everything. It's about how we communicate. It's about relationships. It's about all those boring things that we imagine we don't have time to worry about, like policies and procedures. For years I thought policies, procedures, God, I used to hate writing them. I used to hate reading them. But actually they're really important, because if your child's got a hospital appointment and there's no policy about how you apply for leave of absence and whether you're getting paid or not, then that can cause all sorts of, perceptions of unfairness and confusion and stress and worry. So those things are really important. It almost more important really than the big picture stuff of these are our values and this is how we work as a school. So my audience was really I remember having this argument with the publisher. I was like, everybody who works in a school, but
every single person, millions of teachers.
It was people going into teaching, and giving them, some real tools, practical tools and strategies to stay in teaching in the long term, and school leaders just giving them some practical tips around how they can effectively support their staff and communicate effectively without creating a whole load of extra work for school leaders. Just small things people can do to ensure that people feel valued, and that poor practice, because poor practice happens, it is challenged in a robust and meaningful and supportive and kind way, because no one comes to work to do a bad job.
No, so that's a very good point.
Yeah.
So how do we survive in teaching without it imploding, exploding, or walking away then? What are your top tips? Obviously you can't summarize the whole book. Like a 5-minute answer, but
this is the $1 million question, isn't it? How do we survive and thrive in teaching? So which top? Okay, I'm going to share 3 top tips with you.
That sounds good.
So the first one is let go of perfectionism. So our profession attracts an awful lot of people who really like to get everything right all of the time. To be a teacher, you have to have done pretty well at school, pretty well at university. So a lot of the people who come into teaching have rarely failed at anything. And actually we are living organisms working with other living organisms, and we need to get used to the fact that actually things are going to go wrong, and that is okay. And I can sit here and say at the age of 49, after 25 years in teaching, that I taught a lesson a couple of weeks ago that just went completely tails up, and I thought it was going to be really good. I spent ages planning it. I thought, I found something really cool that the children will chime with, and they just weren't having any of it on that day. And I left feeling a bit deflated and thinking, I still can't do it. But actually, you know, things will go wrong. Living organisms working with other living organisms, and children are very, very forgiving. So,
Yes.
you know, keeping an eye on the big
And
picture.
often, sometimes when it goes wrong, but it goes in a different way that you're not expecting. I remember once teaching a lesson, and we heard this little tweeting sound. We wondered what it was. And under the cabinets in the classroom, I was teaching a science classroom, and under the cabinets was a baby bird
Yeah.
that had flown into that. And I, you know, at the time I was like, but my lesson plan, you know, I was a new teacher and I had a lesson plan and a structure, and this baby bird was not going to fit in with my plan. But actually, it was a science lesson. There was a baby bird, and me rescuing it because we got the caretaker to come and try and get it, and his hands were too big to fit behind the cabinet, but mine weren't. So I was the one that was able to actually rescue the baby bird. And actually, it was a wonderful lesson in the end, because when we learned about the baby bird, and it was lovely. But yeah, you get so set in your ideas of how the lesson's got to go that a curveball that's thrown at you can ruin a lesson for you. And in the sense, it doesn't always. It can. They probably remember that lesson more than any other lesson I ever taught.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are so hung up on planning. And obviously planning is really important. I do it still. I plan my lessons. I plan 3 versions of each lesson. Obviously, I spend a lot of time planning. But we have to accept that, you know, human beings are unpredictable. Yeah, I mean, this will show my age. I used to work with an overhead projector, and they were these you should make these transparencies. You colored them with pens, and you put your transparencies on the projector. And I was teaching German, so you match the words up to the pictures. But these projectors had a vent at the side, so I had all these mini pictures fastened with a I want to say safety pin, but I don't mean a safety pin, paper clip.
Yep.
And the paper clip had come off, and I turned this thing on, and their vent just sent these little pictures of sports going all over the classroom. And I was standing there in front of top set year 9 German girls, all girls, and them just looking at me, and all I could see in their eyes was, "You absolute fool." You know, just me scrabbling around the floor. Anyway, so things will go wrong, and that's okay. And things go wrong for everybody, and children are forgiving. And if you're really worried about the direction a series of lessons or a scheme of learning is going in, ask the children. You know, ask them to tell you what's working and what's not, because they will tell you. The second one is the people you surround yourself with. So you know, this is so important, you know, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but there is so much darkness and tragedy in our profession at the moment. And from the people I speak to, and I speak to probably on average 60 people working in schools each week, the sense of loneliness and isolation is massive. You know, it looks like a sociable profession, and it is. It requires constant human contact, but that human contact doesn't always give you a chance to be as honest as you need to be as authentic as you need to be. So surrounding yourself with those people who are going to lift and empower you, who are going to make you giggle, who are going to make you humble in the moments when you need to, you know, experience a bit of humility, and just being really careful. You know, I'm talking about virtual people as well as real people on social media, of getting dragged into those swamps of negativity. Yeah, the swamps of negativity on social media, they wind me up as well, and I find myself dragged in because my algorithms and everything else. And just be really, really careful who you surround yourself with. And you know, if someone inspires you, keep in touch with them. It's this thing, I was thinking about this morning, you know, it is such a small world in education, and 2 of the people I'm working with now are people I worked with 7 years ago. If people come back on the scene, keep in touch with those people who helped you to learn and grow and were there at the moments when you experienced your greatest learning. And I suppose the third tip is around self-knowledge. So there's 2, and I'm still working on this. So there's 2 things there, really. One is around pacing yourself. And just to be clear on everything I talk about to do with well-being, I've made and I continue to make all of the mistakes myself.
I love that.
But, you know, it's constantly under review. It's never, oh, I've got well-being sorted, right? What should we do? No. So that thing where many of us go at September at 1,000 miles an hour. Yeah, so we go, oh, it's September, I'm quite fresh actually. In fact, I'm a bit sick of my family and friends. I'm actually ready to feel like a professional again. really love to see the kids, all these ideas, all these grand plans for my vision and everything I want to fulfill this year. And I'm going to go at it at 100 miles an hour. And I'm going to stay at school till 8 o'clock tonight because, goodness, you know, the childcare's covered and no one really needs me outside school. They've had loads of my time during the holidays. So I'll just stay and I'll pop into school on Saturday and I'll pop into school on Sunday because I'm really enthusiastic about my job. And then, of course, you hit mid-September and people are saying, when's it half term again?
Yeah.
So knowing that shape of the school year and just being, you know, setting those boundaries that you are stubbornly determined to stick to. So on a Wednesday, I will leave school at 4 o'clock. I will leave school at 4 o'clock and I will have an evening. You know, we have in this house, we have family night on a Wednesday. So after 7 o'clock on a Wednesday, nobody's allowed to do anything work related. The kids are in charge. They get to decide what we eat, what we watch.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah, so it's a really simple thing. I am not going to, whatever it is, I'm not going to tell you what your boundaries should be, but whatever your boundaries are, whether it's an early morning dog walk before school or never working on a Saturday or having your work emails unsynced from your phone, really sticking to those boundaries. So that's self-knowledge.
Oh, I wish I'd met you when I was an NQT. And you could have given me this advice because everything you're saying I did, like the whole September, like, oh yay, I'm really keen to get everything done and I'm staying really late and I'm doing all of this. And then the school viruses all come round and you get towards the end of the school term and then you're just absolutely exhausted and you're thinking, why am I so flat and exhausted right now? And yeah.
And I do it as well, and I do it, and I think, oh, I've done it again. And some years I don't do it, and some years, and it's like when you work part time. Anyone listening working part time, you know, I've done part time really, really well, and I've done part time appallingly. So doing part time appallingly, it for me means working all the way through the days when you're not being paid.
Oh dear.
Just check, or just not meaning it's the worst kind of working. It's not purposeful, meaningful working.
Yeah.
When you sit down and say, right, I'm just going to work for 2 hours and get some stuff knocked off the to-do list. Oh, no. It's just checking your email.
Yeah.
And then getting embroiled in some decision making back at school or a mistake someone made over ordering a book or you find out that someone's a bit upset about something and think, oh, well, I'll just check in and see if they're okay. And the next thing you know, your head is in school, but your body's outside school. And then I've done part-time really well where I've said, right, unless the school is burning down or there's genuinely someone in, you know, some kind of catastrophic situation, I do not want to hear from you and I will not check my email. If you need me, phone me. The only disadvantage to that one was that someone started phoning me when I was at my daughter's sports day and I thought, no, boundaries, no, I'm not taking this, and they tried me 6 times, 7 times, 8 times. I eventually picked up the phone and they said, we've got Ofsted tomorrow. So okay, every rule. So there you go. Things will go wrong. Don't be a perfectionist. Forgotten what my second one was. The third one was around self-knowledge and boundaries, and the second one was around networks.
Yes, brilliant.
Around you with.
Fabulous. And your second book came out in 2020, and that was Teacher Wellbeing and Self-Care. So that's a similar sort of theme. Can you tell us more about this book then?
Yes, so this book came about with my friend and colleague Adrian Bethune. And what we wanted to do, see, interestingly, my first book's quite long. The second one's quite short. And it takes a lot longer to write a short book than it does to write a long one. So what we wanted to do, and we're really proud, this book's been really successful. And what we wanted to do was take all of the research that we'd done. So he wrote Wellbeing in the Primary School, which has won various awards. I'd done How to Survive in Teaching and my doctorate. We wanted to kind of pull out all of this research that we'd done, all of our experience, all of the teachers we'd spoken to, and really distill it into some top tips that people could take away and use tomorrow. So these are all things that they're all research based. There's a reading list at the back of the book. We can provide further reading lists if people want to go away and do master's research on this. But in essence, you can pick it up, you can read half a page and go, oh, I might try and do that.
Brilliant.
And you can go away and do it. And anyone at any level in a school can do it. Doesn't cost anything. Not all the strategies will work for everybody, and we're really clear about that from the outset, but all of the strategies in that book have worked for somebody working in a school, and we
Yeah.
deliberately chose the ones that we felt were most powerful. So,
And I
and you can
suppose
write
being
in the book.
short as well, being short as well actually supports teacher wellbeing because you don't have time to sit and read books. So having a short book that you can dip in and out of is more realistic for teachers, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a great quote. Here's an anecdote. Here's a model for how this might work. Here's a page you can scribble on yourself in the book to try it out. There you go, bam. And if it works for you, you can take it away and use it. And if it doesn't work, then you haven't wasted any of your life.
Yeah, I love it. So what are the most common causes of stress for teachers then that you found? And we'll touch on, I'm going to talk about Ofsted in a minute. So if we forget Ofsted for now, because we know that's a huge stress, and I want to touch on that one. But excluding Ofsted at the moment, what would you say are the most common causes of stress for teachers?
Well, the most common causes of stress, gosh, okay, this is a big question
It
because
is.
it's different for everybody. So, and it's something we talk about with well-being as well. So different things will stress you out to the things that will stress me out.
Yeah.
So I might get really stressed out if I say good morning to someone in a corridor and they ignore me. That is
Yeah.
the kind of thing that will really wind me up. You might be a bit more precious about your possessions than I am. I'm very relaxed about possessions, so I'll pop into people's classrooms and say, "Oh, there's a nice pink stapler. I'll just borrow that." And forget I borrowed it. So just to be clear, different things stress different people out. But the biggest cause of stress actually is, rather than being external, because we talk a lot about external accountability and hyper accountability, and that I think is a problem, is that we've internalized that deficit model. So we've got this voice in our head which says not good enough, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. And that voice, of course, is bolstered and supported and amplified by all of those external measures of success. So from lesson observations to performance appraisal to external sources of accountability. And so we have this voice. So what most often I'll get a coachee come on and they'll say, I just feel like I'm crap at my job. I just feel as if, people think I'm rubbish. I'm not doing a good job. I'm not good enough. So that for me, and then that just eats away at you, and it's confirmation bias, isn't it? So if you feel you're not doing a good job, you then, we all get like this. You're overtired and you can only find one shoe in the morning, and you think, oh, I can't even find a shoe.
Look how rubbish I am.
I'm a qualified teacher with a mortgage and a car, and I can't even find a matching pair of socks, or I can't even make breakfast for my children, or I can't even remember to buy milk. And then then of course the little things become the big things, and so that I think that, obviously workload is massive, and I used to argue that workload was a bit of a red herring, because teachers don't mind working hard as long as the work they're doing feeds directly into the student's learning experience. Because
yes, definitely. Yeah, when you're doing work that feels like it's just for the sake of tick box exercise, that's the most frustrating thing, because you're not there for that. You're there for the kids and you want to make a difference to them. Oh, you're preaching to the choir here.
Exactly. So all of that, someone used to call it, look, I'm doing my work. So you'd come out of the classroom. I remember once doing this and saying, oh, that scheme of learning went really well. Could you write it up? It's like, no, I've just taught it. It went down really well with year 10. You can go and have a chat to them if you want to. No, could you write it up? Could you write up all the lesson plans so we can share? No. Or I've just filled in this data, and data can be very powerful. Data has its place. And then someone says, oh no, we don't need it in that format. Could you do it in that format instead? Which literally and historically has required sitting down and starting a whole new Excel spreadsheet, color coding a whole new set of columns just to copy the data, usually with mistakes over. So time wasting work. The problem is, though, in terms of causes of stress and workload, is that since COVID, especially for people working with children with special needs, since COVID, all of the tasks that have come in the direction of schools are life or death. They are health and happiness. They are, so things like safeguarding leads, having to track incidents of sexual violence outside school. It arguably, it's not school's responsibility to do that, but it's still it's about the safety of children. So you're not going to go, oh, that's a superfluous silly task. As I'm sure comes up loads for you, children with undiagnosed special needs banging on the doors of the specialist to try and get somebody to get that child the help that he or she needs. That's not a tick box exercise. That is
No.
life and death. That
Yeah.
well, it's sometimes literally, yeah.
Yeah, no, it literally can be, can't it?
Um,
The mental health implications of not
it,
getting the
it,
diagnosis timely. Yeah.
exactly. My child's self-harming. You've got a 2-year waiting list. Well, hang on, as a parent, and then
Yeah.
as a SENDCO or as a DSL or as a form tutor, you then feel that compassion stress.
Yeah.
It's oh my goodness, I came into this job to make a difference, and I can't.
Yeah.
I literally can't. Factors beyond my control. So that compassion stress,
Yeah.
where which can lead to symptoms of burnout after a while, that is another major one.
Yeah.
Where I'll meet people who will say, oh my goodness, I've always had so much energy, but I just feel really flat. I just feel like I don't care anymore. It's
Yeah.
like going through a pain barrier. You go through this compassion barrier of, and you've probably had these stories as well, where people will wake up on a Tuesday and not be able to get out of bed.
Yeah.
I can't, I
Just
can't,
can't do it anymore.
or someone driving their car and their whole body just froze and they had to pull up by the roundabout and work out how to use their limbs to start the
Oh
car again,
gosh.
because your brain and your body suddenly go, enough, I
Yeah.
can't.
Can't do it
So
anymore.
those are some of the extreme and increasingly common, I'm
Yeah.
talking about symptoms of stress now more than causes, but
Yeah.
that this kind of stress really does ruin lives.
Absolutely. And as we're recording this, there's a lot in the news currently about the pressures teachers and head teachers are facing from Ofsted, particularly after the terribly sad news of head teacher Ruth Perry, who took her own life after her school's rating was downgraded by Ofsted. Um, what advice do you have for teachers and heads who are waiting on an Ofsted inspection? Because that has to be, I've been in schools, been Ofsteded and waiting for Ofsted. It is really stressful. But, for a head teacher who's sat there knowing they're going to be Ofsteded, or sat there knowing the judgment of the Ofsted inspection, but having to keep it quiet before it's published, like, what advice do we have for those teachers and head teachers?
I mean, as a coach and as someone who isn't a head teacher, I've done many roles. Giving advice is
Yeah.
probably not my place. I mean, just to share the mirror, I've worked with 2 groups of head teachers since Ruth Perry's death,
Yeah.
and in both cases, around 40 or 50 head teachers in one room. And pitching those presentations has been a massive challenge, because
Right.
obviously many people's lives were rocked by Ruth Perry's death.
Absolutely.
I think it prodded all sorts of deep feelings, memories, things head teachers had suppressed, periods of time they'd been through and never talked to anyone about. So I'm really worried about the impact that's going to have on what we've already got, a leadership retention crisis.
Yeah.
And I'm coaching people who are leaving headship, and they get my unconditional positive regard. Oh my goodness, those people have so much to offer the world. It's really exciting.
Yeah.
But many of those people are actually very ill. One of them wrote a blog for me recently. At 52, she had a series of cardiac events after her Ofsted. She can't be a head teacher anymore. The decision's been taken out of her hands. At the same time, in those rooms, you get people, and this was, I was in Gateshead not long ago, and I walked into this room, and it was actually the Friday after Ruth Perry's suicide had hit the headlines. And I had spent hours and hours and hours tweaking and changing this presentation to get the tone right. And I sat with this group of, happened to be women, and they were an SLT team. And I said, how are you doing? It's really tough at the moment, isn't it? And they said, yeah, but you've just got to get on with it, haven't you? And I thought, oh gosh, yes, actually. That idea that you don't have to. We've all got agency. You can choose not to get on with it anymore. You can choose to go and do something else, or you can choose to just get on with it, and get up each morning and do the best you can for your community. And this thing about, there's one other head who I just want to talk about, and I will keep her anonymous, but she's very wise. She's had she had a complex life with a number of different personal challenges of her own, and she's now a head teacher. And she almost talks about, she risk assesses everything. So she kind of plans ahead for the worst possible scenario to take the heat out of it. So she's done that with Ofsted. So she's basically said, look, I think I'm running my school really well. I've tapped into all the support, to all the feedback. If the same thing happens to me as happened to Ruth Perry's school, if we're downgraded to inadequate, I will take a deputy head job at a school down the road, because I know I make a really good deputy head. And I know that almost sounds simplistic and maybe a bit brutal, but she's thought through what she would do if. and to be the kind of head who, as one said to me the other day, who basically said, I have decided that I'm going to do what's best for my school regardless of Ofsted, is hugely admirable.
Yeah.
And takes an awful lot of courage, and to put that into practice, I appreciate, is incredibly hard. So I know I've done a bit of a politician's answer there, but
No, you haven't.
I'm not a head teacher.
Yeah.
I'm not, it's one of the few roles in a school I haven't done. I nearly was. I was about to do the MPQH in 2019.
Oh, cool.
And so every now and again I have there but for the grace.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I'd have had that kind of courage. I'm not sure I'd have had the kind of resilience to be able to say, oh, well, we've just got to get on with it.
Yeah.
I think I would have internalized and taken everything deeply personal, because it's your school, it's your name.
Absolutely. And your community, and
but I think things are changing. There is, loads of people keeping the momentum going. Ruth Perry's sister in particular, Julia, is been amazing at keeping the momentum going. I think things are changing, and waiting for the juggernaut to turn around, the system to change is always frustrating. But there is a sense that actually each day I log on and there's another story and another story and another story, and that building momentum does give me a sense that of hope.
You never know when people are listening to this podcast in September, because we're recording it a little bit earlier than September, but when they're listening in September, maybe there might have been some change.
Yeah.
Perhaps, we don't know.
Maybe.
So when we talk back about staff wellbeing, so I know there's been lots of examples of this mandatory wellbeing, and I asked on Twitter, you might have seen, if people could give some examples of sort of mandatory wellbeing, and the idea that wellbeing should be like, we've spoken a little bit about it, the idea that wellbeing is all about, it should be woven into the school life, not an add-on, a bolt-on. And I asked people on Twitter, they've given me permission to share these, but there's some quite, they're amusing but they're awful at the same time, examples of mandatory wellbeing. One of them says, I once sat through a half-a-day session on Inset telling us how important wellbeing was, where we practiced breathing amongst other things. And the day before term started, I was desperate to get in and finish setting up my classroom and really anxious about starting a new school. And that session made it far worse, which is awful. And then another one where someone said, we had an Inset session where we had to spend 20 minutes appraising a raisin. We had to look at it, notice it, feel it, sniff it, hold it in our mouths. I kid you not, that was the language used.
Oh, Lord. Yes. So this, oh God, and this is a really, I realize again, I'm speaking as a wellbeing facilitator, and I said early on in this, not all of the strategies I share will be for everybody, and not every wellbeing session will be for everybody. I mean, I've seen some brilliant ones as well in my time. Compulsory chocolate. No, we had wine tasting after school on a Friday, and then suddenly at the last minute, someone remembered that not everyone drinks alcohol, so it was a choice between wine or chocolate, and we all had to stay until 4 o'clock on a Friday tasting wine or chocolate, when actually everyone wanted to go home. There was my favourite one, I think, is compulsory yoga for all staff. School with the best will in the world did, but even genuinely nice, well-meaning things can really backfire. So what I always say to school leaders is I'm not going to give you a list of extra things to do. When I'm talking to you about the well-being of your team, I am genuinely not asking you to go and design a well-being room with wind chimes, because someone will hate the sound of the wind chimes, and someone will hate the color you've painted the room, and that lovely idea that when you buy so this amazing school bought staff pizza on isn't that lovely? First day of term. Thought, oh, everyone's going to be a bit knackered. Well, everyone's going to be it was after Christmas. Everyone's going to be a bit knackered coming back. We'll get them pizza. And what happened? Well, the first thing was they hadn't taken into account vegan and gluten-free. So there were a whole group of staff saying, well, do you even know us? Did you even ask? And then the second thing that happened was that some staff just left their pizza boxes and all their rubbish. And then the SLT member who'd stopped on the way to work to buy the pizza, so left an extra hour early and organised their childcare to an hour early, then had to clear up.
So their well-being was impacted by it.
But I really did. So I was in a school, a lovely school, in a local town at the beginning of, when was it? It was just after the holiday, just after Easter, and I was doing a whole day on well-being, and I was really excited. So I went on Twitter and said, that's my favourite thing, a whole day on well-being in a primary school. And someone came back to me and said, that would be my idea of hell. Please let me get on with my marking. So what I did actually was I said at the beginning of the day, I said, look, I read them the tweet and I said, actually, I'm honestly, I've spoken to your head teacher. You can choose to be in this room, or you can choose to go off and sort out whatever it is you need to sort out, or you can stay till break and then you can go off, or you can, it's
I like
entirely
that.
up to you.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm very relieved to say they all stayed. But
Can you imagine if they'd all gone, Emma?
well, no, but I checked with the head teacher and I said, I really do want this to be, meaningful. So what we do in the wellbeing sessions is we talk about the students. We look down the
Yeah.
mountain at the things we've achieved. We reflect on the things that are challenging. We
Yeah.
talk about the national picture and the influence that all these different factors are having on our schools. And we talk about our own stress levels. That's a lovely session. So we get people to reflect on how they react when they're stressed.
Yeah.
And then because it was a small school, we went around the room and everyone was able to talk about what happens to them when they're stressed and what works and what doesn't. And they were saying things like, please don't try and fix the problem for me, please don't tell me what to do. And in fact, one of the staff said, oh my goodness, I'm a fixer, I always go around trying to fix people's problems, I'm going to stop doing that now.
Yeah.
So what we do with the wellbeing sessions that I run, that Adrian runs, is we really try to get into the fabric of what it is to be a teacher or a TA or a finance manager in this school, and how we can, and just take that moment to reflect on how we're genuinely feeling about our jobs and ourselves, and how
that sort of well-being I would have appreciated. The add-on stuff where you had to do something after school, I would have been one of the teachers that wanted to go off and do the marking and just get everything finished. But yeah, when you're saying that sort of well-being where you're discussing how you're feeling and you're discussing the actual problems in school and how they could be resolved and how different people are dealing with things in a different way, that's actually constructive, isn't it, and useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, oh no, I've seen some terrible stuff. I sat through a wellbeing session where everything was a car metaphor, and it was all about keeping your gearbox well oiled, and I sat there thinking, oh my god, I don't want to think about catalytic converters and exhaust pipes. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even understand what you're talking about. You get all sorts, honestly.
Yes, absolutely. So our listeners are predominantly SENCOs or SEND teachers and head teachers, and these roles, like we've touched on a little bit, they come with additional responsibilities. I know lots of roles have additional responsibilities, and obviously I'm biased in saying that SENCOs and SEND teachers have extra responsibilities, but I do think they do. There's legal paperwork, there's liaising with other professionals, there's being responsible for children's medical needs, sometimes even supporting children with life-limiting conditions and supporting their families through that. There's a lot. How can we because their responsibilities, like we said, they're not a tick box exercise. Those responsibilities are genuine responsibilities that can be life and death. They can be hugely important for children's well-being and children's time in school and for families, etc. How do we actually make sure these responsibilities don't become overwhelming? Because for a SENCO, especially a teaching SENCO as well, like you just don't have time for all of this. There's just not the time to teach, and then the headspace to look after all of these people. It's so much, and I just wonder, how do you make sure it's not overwhelming? What can they do?
Right, well, I don't think it's a coincidence that 5 or 6 of my recent coaches have been either SENCOs or DSLs, and they've come to me without their schools knowing, saying, I just need someone to offload with, I just need someone to talk to. I would argue from my perspective that it is the hardest job in a school at the moment, to be a SENCO and to be a DSL, because you're absorbing all of the pain and all of the disadvantage and all of the inequity from society. You're on the front line, you're in schools remained open. I know there are lots of organizations doing brilliant work, but there are lots of organizations outside schools still really struggling, massive waiting lists, getting hold of those specialists. But you're the one the parents are going to go to. You're the one whose name they know. You're the one they trust. And the risk, and I will talk about some ways forward in a minute, but the risk is that you end up, and these are true stories, one DSL, I think she was DSL and SENCO, and she said she sleeps with her phone by her head because a small community, she said, I'm the only one these families trust.
Oh gosh, the weight of that.
She was, when I met her, not sleeping a full night because she was at the end of the phone for those parents. I've got another colleague who says he never has his CPOMs. His CPOMs is on all of the time. So the safeguarding reporting system is on all of the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if he stops at a set of traffic lights, he checks it. If he wakes up in the night, he checks it. In the middle of a holiday, he checks it. and I can see, and he was quite, I did my usual thing on boundaries, and he said, but Emma, it's not that simple. And I get it. But then I do work with another very wise head of safeguarding in a school, and she basically said, look, we're an educational institution. We are a school with the best will in the world. We're not GPs. We're not social workers. We're not psychotherapists. We're not qualified to diagnose some of these conditions.
No.
And so just remembering, we are a school. So if it's during a weekend and it's during a holiday, it's so hard to do this, but it has to be. It's somebody else's job.
Yeah.
Because otherwise the risk is, and I know I'd be really interested to see data on this, but I strongly suspect that we're going to be facing, or we probably already are facing, a massive shortage of SENDCOs.
Yeah.
Because you're going to burn out. If you're listening to a SENDCO, and unless you put those boundaries in place and have the support, for goodness sake, of your SLT, your governors, your academy chain, whoever are those powers that be are, to say, this is not sustainable in its current form. I am prepared to work 50 hours a week, 55 hours a week, 45 hours a week, whatever it is. But beyond that, I am going to risk burning out. So I need help. I need support, I need capacity, and I need you to support me in that. And that is so hard. It's so easy for me to say. And again, I'm not a SENDCO, because you're absorbing the pain, you're absorbing the triumphs too, but it's all emotionally hungry. It's emotionally hungry work.
Absolutely.
And you will have people at home or people, outside work who love you, who need you. And it's that awful truism, isn't it, of, you're everyone's replaceable at work, but you're not replaceable at home. It's awful, but head teachers who die get replaced within a couple of weeks because they have to be. Teachers who die, you will, if you're listening and you've worked with a school where you've lost a member of staff, you will know that an ad for their job goes out pretty quickly. But at home, to say, my mom, dad, sister, friend sacrificed their life to this work, the cost is too great. And I know, and I get it. And we're in such a broken system in so many ways at the moment. That because one more thing on this, because schools are so good at being resilient, absorbing tasks, shrugging their shoulders and saying, well, let's get on with it anyway. We're so resourceful. You can throw pretty much anything. I'm not going to use specific examples because I'm aware of anonymity, but you could throw pretty much anything at a school and they'd say, right, okay, so who have we got? So we've got this, okay, we'll move this TA around, we'll create this safe space. We've got these resources, which I think might help. We're just going to call in this expert that we know and just ask them a favor. We will deal with almost anything, but because we'll deal with almost anything, it's almost as if we're taken for granted by the powers that be. So you just suck it up. Oh, the school will deal with it. The school will deal with it. The school will deal with it. And at the moment, it's like, we're starting to creak under the pressure, and it does genuinely worry me. And I am an optimist, but I'm worried.
No, I completely agree with everything you say, and it is worrying. And I think it's too much. And at what point does it become too much and people can't manage? And what happens to the system then? It's frightening. So last question then, if there's a teacher listening right now who started the school year and is already worrying how they're going to cope, is there any nugget of advice for them to help them through the first few weeks of term?
Yeah, you know what? For everything I've just said, teaching is a really joyful job. Honestly,
no, it is.
Unpredictable, silly moments, the moments of enlightenment. Children are brilliant. I haven't talked much about children in this podcast.
That's okay.
Children are awesome. They will say and do the silliest things. They will tell you your shoes are fabulous. If you're being observed and you're acting up for the observer, they'll say, Miss, why are you being weird? They'll come out with, oh, brilliant, of men and mice instead of mice and men. All these silly little brilliant moments. Capture them somewhere. Because actually, if you are entering the profession, congratulations and welcome. And it is a noble profession and it is a joyful profession. It's a profession fraught with challenges. But but celebrate the wins.
Yeah.
Celebrate even the tiniest wins. If a child leaves your detention and says, "Thanks, miss," go, "Yes."
Oh, the
I
kids
got
that
a
say
moment
thank you. Yeah.
after
Oh, bless
detention.
them.
Yeah. Or the child leaves your lesson and says, "You weren't as boring as usual today, miss."
Yeah.
Yes, I'll take that. Or they remember something you taught them 3 weeks ago. Yes. So whether it's a notebook to capture it in, or a little note app on your phone, or someone, a buddy you talk to in the staff room, because we do have a negativity bias as human beings, and we will always, and we have a negativity bias as a profession, and we'll always lean towards that deficit, not good enough model, unless we deliberately focus in the other direction. And there is so much to focus on in the other direction.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. We haven't spoken about kids enough, because they are absolutely brilliant, and they do make the job what it is, don't they? They make it absolutely fantastic. And really, really good fun. So if people, I'm sure people listening to this and watching this might be thinking, we need to find out how to get in touch with you, perhaps for some training or for some coaching or whatever. How do they find you? Always sounds like a dodgy question. How can they find you, Emma? But how can they?
I'm not very hard to find, actually. So I am on Twitter most days at Those That Can, tweeting about education and dogs. So if you don't like dogs, sorry. You can email me, Emma Kell, EMMAKELL @me.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can find me on there under Dr Emma Kell. So yes.
And I'll put some links to that, as well as some resources we've got on wellbeing and the names of books, etc. I'll put those into the show notes. So if you're listening or watching, if you have a look under the show notes, you'll be able to find links to all the things we've been discussing. So thanks again. That's been brilliant. It's been really useful.
Thank you so much for having me.
Isn't she brilliant? What a fantastic guest, and some really useful bits of advice there for the start of the term. So I hope the new academic term goes well for all of you. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel either on your podcast provider or on YouTube, and share this episode with people. Tell them that you're listening, tell people on social media. Thanks again for listening and watching Sending the Experts with me, Georgina Durrant.